This is the place where the Dakota tribes met year after year
century after century.
to exchange goods and ideas,
This is the place where their lives all change.
with the signing of one small treaty,
The Treaty of Traverse des Sioux.
The Treaty of Traverse des Sioux could have been a very successful treaty had the United States government followed through on all that they had promised.
Because the government didn't do what they promised, the Dakota people staged an uprising, which led to the devastating deaths of both white and Dakota people.
The nomadic Dakotas met together once a year to exchange goods, ideas, and other things of value at a place they called Oiuije, meaning the place of crossing.
The fur traders renamed this place Traverse des Sioux, meaning crossing of the Sioux. The Dakota did not have a concept of owning land as we do now. They lived on a philosophy of sustainable sustenance, in which they only took from the land what they needed to survive. This allowed abundance off of the land for generations to come.
The fur traders benefited greatly from this land in terms of trade. Every fall, the Dakota would receive the goods that they needed, and in the spring, they would pay these people back with furs.
The Dakota relationships with the fur traders became so intimate that many fur traders took on Dakota wives and were welcomed into the tribe by the ceremony of Hunka. The Dakota assumed that because the fur traders were now relatives, they could be trusted.
In the 1840s and 50s, the United States government encouraged the fur traders to rack up immense debts with the Dakota. By 1851, the Dakota owed so much money that the traders only gave them limited goods. Also in the late 1840s, the demand for furs was lessening, so the traders wanted the Dakota's land and money to repay their debts more than the furs. They informed the governor, Henry Sibley, of this, and he immediately saw the advantage of interceding.
However, Sibley had to get the consent of the government. He told them that now, the Dakota were confused, starving, and desperate for goods, so they were in a weakened condition and would be more likely to sign a treaty. With a little bit of pressure, Sibley got the government to negotiate a deal with the Dakota that became known as the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux. The best way to understand what truly occurred that fateful day is to listen to the people who were there on the 23rd of July in 1851. When we signed the treaty, the traders threw blankets over our faces and darkened our eyes, and got us to sign papers we did not understand, which were not read to us or explained to us.
The commissioners having first signed the treaty, the chiefs stepped forward in rotation and touched the pen which the secretary used to indite their names. Some few who had been instructed by the missionaries wrote their names, and many prefaced their signature with a short speech.
The Sioux Treaty will hang like a curse over our heads for the rest of our lives.
It was July 23rd, 1851, at Traverse des Sioux, Minnesota Territory. It was a beautiful day. The mood of the village was light because the diplomatic negotiations surrounding the treaty were finally finished. The negotiation was long and drawn out, but it had its perks for the Dakota people. They were given food and wine as incentives to make them more favorable toward the treaty. The terms of the Peace of Diplomacy stated that the Dakota were to relinquish their land from the southwestern portions of the Minnesota Territory over to the United States government. The Dakota were to receive $1.6 million in cash and annuities, rations of flour, sugar, salted pork, as well as tools, new land, and shelter. After some time, these payments ended.
As we can see from what Frank Blackwell Mayer stated so many years ago, many of the Dakota chiefs were illiterate, so the treaty had to be read and translated to them. This put the Dakota chiefs at the mercy of their interpreters, the fur traders. Because of this disjointed communication, it was very easy for the traders to take advantage of the Dakota's willingness to comply with the United States.
From what can be drawn from the few, less biased sources, the traders did indeed take advantage of the Dakota in a substantial way.
This picture was painted as an accurate depiction of the signing of the treaty. However, it is a biased source, for it only shows the one legal table where the diplomacy was finished and the treaty was signed, totally ignoring the other illegal table that should be to the left of it.
Somewhere in the process of setting up the signing of the treaty, the fur traders managed to corrupt Sibley and other government officials to allow them to create their own document and usher the illiterate Dakota over to sign it. That is what took place at the illegal table.
The Traders' Papers, as they came to be called, were a malevolent way to get around Congress's recent ruling that traders were not to be mentioned in any treaty, for through the Traders' Papers, the Dakota signed away most of their annuity money and were left with almost nothing.
This reservation was set aside for the Dakota and was 20 miles wide and 70 miles long.
Some of the Dakota's old villages were included in these reservations, some were not. However, the Dakota peacefully moved to the new land without protest.
Because the Traders' Papers took away most of the Dakota's money, the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux mostly was a failure. However, it has a few small successes that were gained by the United States.
This treaty enlarged the Minnesota Territory so much that it eventually became a state in 1858. Also, the United States proved that they could obtain new land without any casualties. The Treaty of Traverse des Sioux was a failure for many reasons. Now we will listen to Dakota affected by the treaty to better understand why.
They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it.
I can see nothing, as nothing is to be seen. When the treaty was written, I thought it was for the good of my people. You have explained it, and we understand it, but it has not been fulfilled, and we bow our heads and are quiet. We see nothing but promises. Flat Mouth, August 26, 1856.
By August 1862, the Dakota's annuity payment for the year was overdue for many months. The Dakota are hungry and the children are crying for food, for the food they received was spoiled. Many agree that something must be done. Something big, something now.
At this time, the country is at civil war, and the best soldiers from all the states are engaged in combat, leaving the forts and land taken from the Dakota more vulnerable to attack. The time is perfect for an uprising. The major consequence of the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux was exactly that, an uprising that led into a war which took the lives of many people and ended the United States-American Indian treaties.
The U.S.-Dakota War of 1862, which happened in August of 1862, went through September of 1862, was really the culmination of a lot of things. A culmination of U.S. Indian policy that had gone on since Jamestown, removing Indians from land, pushing them west, that whole kind of thing. The U.S.-Dakota War ended with 38 Dakota people hung at Mankato on December 26, 1862, and that is still the largest mass execution in American history. Bigger than that, there are 500 white civilians that were killed over that number, and over 500 Dakota people that were also killed during the war. Many millions of dollars in damage to property and cattle and all that kind of thing, and the Dakota people really lost their way of life in Minnesota. The Dakota War in many ways was the start of what was called the Indian Wars, which went on for the next 30 years, from 1862 through 1898. And so the U.S.-Dakota War in many ways was the fire that exploded the powder barrel, which was the U.S. Indian Wars, and really ended the U.S. Indian policy of the 19th century.
The diplomacy in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux ended in total failure because of how the peace-loving Dakota were driven to war by one small treaty.
This failure led to the end of the United States diplomatic negotiations with Native Americans and led to a period known as the Indian Wars, which continued on for the next 30 years, so the United States diplomatic way to gain land from the Native Americans ended in failure.
Today, we as the descendants of the people involved in this tragic event must learn from our ancestors' diplomatic failure so that we always uphold our side of treaties and never allow corruption to occur during the negotiations.
We must treat the Native Americans with honor and respect because of the important part of our country's heritage that they have become.